Okay, we are ready. Thank you very much. Welcome, Darren, and take it away.
All right, and I'm advancing to my title slide, which I hope you can see, Joy. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
All right, so we're technology. It takes 3 times, but here we are.
Somebody needs to turn their mic off. I hear some hammering or something.
There we go. That was actually, sometimes they ring a bell at the beginning of a meditation thing or mindfulness. That's our bell. It got everybody's attention, I'm imagining, and maybe especially the person who had the sound. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm excited. I tend to resonate well with librarian crowds because I'm a librarian at heart. I'm kind of a social worker, librarian, helper type at heart. I'm excited to be able to kind of blend some of my interests, though, this idea of helping make pathways for people to navigate something that I think is really important. That's a library skill I think of. I also think of, like, when I think of librarianship, I think of asking better questions and, not being in such a rush to get to answers that we don't also work on asking better questions. But I also am excited to be able to specifically address something that's been very impactful for me, not only in my own personal exploration, but in sharing it with others as a mindfulness coach, this idea of mindfulness. And what I'm hoping to do today is spark some ideas for, I really think it's an invitation to join me on the cutting edge of something that I predict will grow and become common knowledge in the same way that physical fitness, the idea that you could exercise your body, even if you weren't in the military or a soldier or an Olympic athlete, you could find a way to be healthier by finding exercises that work for you. That, whether we're doing that or not, that is common knowledge grounded in science. And I think that mindfulness, it's time, and everything is, the stage is set for this, that this idea of moving mindfulness away from something mystical and odd and esoteric into something very practical, especially in times of great uncertainty, the ability to develop skills of attention that help you navigate the messiness of your life. So I'm excited to be able to kind of combine my interests and share them with you. Please interrupt with ideas or if you have a question as we go, and I appreciate Joy keeping an eye on your questions. Please don't be shy about asking me to go over something or expand on something or defend on something. I love curveballs and I love having pushback and things. I really see this as something that it's material I'm testing. And so thanks for the opportunity to try it out with you guys and see if it's as relevant for the librarian world, as the information world, as I think it is. What I'd like to do is go over quickly. I have in mind that many of you have participated in the previous 1 or 2 sessions. So you already get a sense of how, if I'm thinking of promoting it to you as a professional, someone who's looking for self-care to manage stress, to consider this as an interesting thing for yourself. But I want to kind of expand this, so talking about where I think Attentional fits into the project of overall well-being, so that you can start to promote this in the world with me. Help me promote this idea if it resonates with you. I've got this middle section here where I've identified walls that I think, how I look at it is, there's so many ways people could benefit from cultivating attentional fitness through mindfulness practice. But there's so many walls that prevent that from happening. People run into something and then it's just done. And I like to be on the lookout for being able to turn those walls into windows of opportunity, a doorway into something that seemed like it was blocked. And then the librarian in me wants to provide some ways to navigate. Once that door is open, how do I get through? How do I find stuff that's practical and useful? And once we go through some examples of those myth-busting ideas, demystifying ideas, then specifically thinking about how could this look in your library, especially at this time with the kind of pandemic constraints. So what am I talking about when I'm talking about attentional fitness? I want people to know that just as you know it's possible to exercise your body to develop certain physical capacities and abilities, physical strength, flexibility, endurance, we can find exercises to work on specific physical capacities. I don't think enough people realize there's something very similar going on when it comes to our ability to pay attention. And I don't think the demand has ever been greater for realizing this, that we're not just at the mercy of what demands our attention, but that we could actually spend a few minutes daily-ish to start to respond and prepare and equip ourselves to be more resilient, to face the challenges that we face. I think right now in a polarized world that's impacted by a pandemic, I don't think it's ever been more significant and more relevant, which also gives me hope that people are more open to hearing about this. But I think of attentional fitness as a natural trainable capacity for noticing, being able to pay attention to sensory perceptions that are happening right now. This is in contrast to our attention is usually used up. Our attentional budget is usually used up by thinking and planning and imagining and evaluating. So we're talking about attentional fitness being able to toggle off that thinking mode into noticing, checking in with our environment, with our body, with our emotions. Attentional fitness makes it possible to notice what's happening right now and to maybe fight with that a little less. We can get better at savoring pleasant moments where we're comfortable. We can get better at fighting with unpleasant moments. Doesn't make the unpleasant moments not unpleasant, but it can be a game changer to cultivate the capacity to fight with those moments less. That's not I become a better person or a spiritual person or somehow a transcendent person necessarily, but it's that realizing I have options for responding, and that when I can drop my resistance a little to what's happening right now, it can really open up the possibility of responding with intentionality, being more effective, having less mess to clean up afterwards. So we're going to be uncomfortable and confused and sad and embarrassed, but we don't need to habitually make those things worse by relying on our default settings. When we are able to do these things, what I think is I'm not shooting for happiness in the kind of, I don't know what, Disney or Hallmark Channel happiness, some kind of a sanitized thing. I also don't want to go live in a monastery. I don't want the world to have to change for me to be able to navigate it. So I think attentional fitness is a huge contribution to being able to be more resilient, be more equipped to respond to the actual messiness of life, the daily fluctuation of the challenges we face, so that we can get more skilled, we can learn as we go, and maybe feel like we're inhabiting our lives a little more fully with practice. It's a project that doesn't just take care of itself, usually. It's something we have to invest in, just like our physical fitness. And the cool thing is when we engage in this at all, in this endeavor, one thing I've observed again and again is that it kind of softens us a little bit in our response to other people. There's a tendency, I have a strong tendency, if other people would just get their act together, my life would feel better. That makes logical sense, but it doesn't make practical sense because people stay human. When I, however, try to fight with unpleasant moments less, for example, or inhabit my life more fully, I realize it's a real challenge. And that helps me see that if it's a challenge for me, it's a challenge for you. You might be doing it, you might be responding in different ways, but wow, we're really all in this challenge together. And there's an opportunity here to go below the level of what polarizes us to recognize the humanity underneath. I think it's sorely missing right now from all the discussions. I don't think attentional fitness is everything. I don't think it replaces anything. I think it's a valuable addition to what we understand currently about well-being. So I want to get away from this model that we can eat healthy and take care of our bodies and do some things And then off to the side, there's this weird optional add-on that looks like some kind of strange hippie thing to do, some kind of a weird yoga pose that I have to do. Why would I want to do that? Instead of here's my well-being as this big whole thing, and this is an optional add-on, I see medical science, neuroscience, even, I don't know, it goes beyond that for me because it's not just science, it's also kind of an art. There's a human art to this paying attention business. So I have as much to learn from a poet and a director and a dancer as I do from a neuroscientist. But that being said, I don't want attentional fitness to be this weird feeling add-on. I want people to realize that it can be a part of integrating all the other pieces. So if we think of to feel healthy and thrive and have a vitality, even in the messiness of life, it's important that we get sleep. This is a big one, right? It's important that we move our bodies sometimes. It's important that we learn how to pay attention instead of having our attention just be demanded, being at the mercy of what demands it. Of course, there's like nutritional eating. And this is something I don't think maybe we talk about enough, but to me, this is important. We need to address medical issues, medical and mental health issues. If we have symptoms, we need to go get those checked out and get some support. And there's the age-related declines, which I'm, experiencing as I'm getting older, that my vision is getting worse and my hearing's getting worse. And these matter, not just because it's hard to see and it's hard to hear, but that, the research supports this idea that when we start to lose our hearing, I'm very intimately familiar with this one, it's harder to tease the signal from the noise when it comes to language. So if we can intervene in our hearing, we can hold on to our cognitive capacities for being able to understand each other and communicate and avoid the decline, the cognitive decline that comes when we start to recede away from being able to hear each other, see each other. I also find that social emotional connections are hugely important for well-being, and it's good to be a lifelong learner, have hobbies and interests. What I think a benefit will be when we start to realize that attentional fitness deserves a place at this table is that attentional exercises can support all the others. It's a foundational skill. The ability to navigate insomnia, to coax myself into exercising when exercising is inconvenient or uncomfortable. How do I relate to the discomfort of running or swimming or lifting weights? How do I start to make more conscious choices about what I'm eating instead of just relying on my habits, my default habits of emotional eating or stress eating, right? Really being able to disrupt my patterns and get more familiar with those. And on and on. This idea of attentional exercises, the more I have this kind of awareness, this real-time self-awareness, it supports all the other pieces of the well-being puzzle. How it does this is that it develops skills of attention that are sorely underappreciated, that I think we mistake these things for personality traits. I can either focus or I can't. I notice what I'm feeling or I don't notice, right? It's this kind of a thing. These specific skills are being shown to be measurable, that we can increase the baseline of these capacities, attentional capacities, by exercising them. If we want to get better at concentrating, we have to practice deciding what to notice and deciding what to allow to be in the background, steering our attention back. That might sound familiar if you've ever heard of like a breath awareness exercise. Decide to notice the sensations of breathing, steer your attention back when it wanders. This is the way we develop concentration. It doesn't feel like we have much focus when we're exercising this capacity, but this is how we exercise it. Through repetition, we can develop what I think of as we can become sensory connoisseurs. We can become more attuned to the subtleties and richness of our ordinary sensory perceptions, which is huge when it comes to being able to feel like your ordinary day is a little more richer, to be able to notice distinctions between different emotions and different kinds of discomforts. When it comes to emotional awareness, not just talking about addressing our personal narrative issues, our things we're bringing with us in our personality and our upbringing and things, but actually being able to be aware of an emotion while it's happening, not just abstract and not just convey it as a story, but to be able to, this is what it feels like to be scared or frustrated or embarrassed, and to be able to actually regulate those emotions. This is one that I think is huge. We sort of don't really understand the extent to which de-escalation could be a game changer on this planet, I think in this country, for all involved. I think I see this in even the protests, right? It gets summarized to this thing, a peaceful protest was responded to with this pushback, violent pushback. There's so much nuance happening here. But what if protesters and those who are, this is a fraught topic, but the people who should be de-escalating, what if all the adults had some self-regulation skill, that we could actually have protest and difficult conversation where we actually move the needle on some of these critically important issues instead of just escalating ourselves and each other. Part of the problem here on that one, I want to just put a little note. We live in a really interesting time where if you escalate someone or someone escalates you, you could be a national or global news story by the end of the day. If you learn how to regulate, if you learn how to de-escalate, if you have an instance where you've got a patron who's upset and you find a way to first de-escalate yourself and de-escalate them and navigate out of that problem, this is the world we live in. That will not go viral. You're not going to get to be flooded with examples of skillful de-escalation, but it's what we need. And I think librarians are poised to be able to help me these attentional skills. The equanimity is just being able to kind of hold it together as we navigate the challenges of life. And that's broadly applicable to a lot of things. And I think this one is also important, this idea of being civil and having empathy and doing things that intentionally cultivate a sense of kindness and recognition of our shared humanity. So these are the kind of things I think of when I think of attentional fitness. But when we start thinking of mindfulness as a way to build that, I think we have a very small, narrow view of what mindfulness is. And it's a form of meditation with your eyes closed, probably breath awareness, and the point is largely some kind of relaxation. I think that's the big perception. And I think that there's a lot of things that get in the way from moving us beyond that idea, but we really do have to move beyond that idea of mindfulness looks like someone sitting down, closing their eyes, and feeling their breath. One of the first walls that gets in the way is that mindfulness is religious. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not even a vegetarian. I was raised Baptist, fundamentalist in Kansas. When I was sort of like at my wit's end and stumbled into mindfulness, I was freaked out by the statues. We thought Catholics were, devil worshippers. So you can imagine, I was like, does there have to be a statue of this person from another culture? I certainly have come to appreciate the contribution to the contemplative world from the world of Buddhism, but I do think it's time to separate, to untangle these, and to realize that every tradition, every wisdom tradition has a contemplative core, has some practices that are not about the laws and the stories and the believing, but about inhabiting your life more fully and feeling like you're a direct part of creation, that you didn't, there's a way to savor your life. I think it's a mistake to constantly make this connotation between mindfulness and Buddhism. And I think the mindfulness world is really guilty of perpetuating this. I personally want to see this change. I remember it's not that long ago when there's like shelves and shelves of books about mindfulness, and they all have this flavor. But now there's starting to be some something new is happening. There's some shifts happening because of the influence of the scientific validity and how the research. So this is actually, I found a picture of me going into the MRI at the Harvard study. So in the middle picture, you can see my brain. Sometimes I used to make jokes about, if I go to the gym and work out, I can have a before and after picture, and that will impress people. But no one's gonna care if I show off my, my hippocampus. Check out my hippocampus. I've really been working on it. It doesn't work that way, which is part of the problem, which leads to the reliance on, these Buddha statues, because we don't know how to illustrate this thing that we're talking about. How do you illustrate real-time awareness and emotional regulation and the ability to decide how to respond? But the neuroscientists are figuring this out, and they're finding out it's a lot like physical exercise. It's just complicated in being able to see it. So another joke I'll do on presentations is do a before and after picture, where the before and after looks exactly the same. To the outside world, if you saw me 18 years ago, you would say, I don't get it, you're just a little older. There's nothing that you can see in a photograph that says I've been exercising my attention. You would have to be in my inner circle, or be related to me, or be someone I care about, or someone in my family, or someone I've coached to be able to say, to be able to talk about the difference between how I used to react habitually to things and some of the skills I've developed, that I at least sometimes rely on these ways to navigate. But so my main point here is, let's get away from always couching mindfulness as something that has to have a religious connotation. In fact, I like to have people realize this is not that you have to switch from whatever you currently believe in order to benefit from mindfulness practice. Mindfulness practice will help you no matter what it is that you believe. And that could be someone who, like an atheist, or who has some different way that they're approaching life, as a stoic, or I think there has to be room for, if you're practicing a certain religion, I run into this a lot. If you have some kind of daily devotional time, I guarantee you, if you practice a little mindfulness, you're going to get more out of that. I'm not interested in talking you out of your worldview. I'm interested in stimulating some new questions and getting you to think about, what if you had a capacity for savoring your experience even more, grounded in science, and yet room for there to be an artistic or personalization of your exploration of those practices. So the way through this, I think, is to start emphasizing books in our collection and promoting voices that are broadening this scope beyond just this narrow idea of this being a Buddhist thing. I'll just say that. I will pause here to say, while I've been preparing this presentation, I've also been curating a list of resources for all my main points. So while I have like a smattering of examples here, I've got more probably than you want that are coming in the form of a Word doc. What I find is that as I give a presentation like this, I'll also remember things I've wanted to include. So I'm going to have that to Joy probably by tomorrow, and I will add on based on how this session goes. So I'll just highlight a couple things here. Altered traits by respected researchers. This idea that getting away from this idea of mindfulness being about having some kind of altered state, like it was big in the 60s or 70s, but that we're actually changing capacities. We're changing people's baseline's ability to concentrate and regulate themselves. Huge. So this book looks at the different science and some of the weakness that is in the existing science, and hopefully where the direction is going for that to improve. A lot more emphasis these days on biometrics, not just subjective reporting. If you ask people to do an exercise and then say, do you feel less stress? No matter what exercise you give them, they feel less stress. But when there starts to be changes in their cortisol levels and their blood pressure and their heart rates, then you're getting the attention of the medical world and the science world, right? And those are the things I think we have to be aware of. Also, this is not just stuff like that kind of stress, but also how gratitude practices and empathy practices can change the physiology and how we're holding our stress and how we're managing, how we are able to connect with other people. There's a lot of objective research into these questions. but then I just include him because he's kind of the grandfather of this current explosion. He has several books. Full Catastrophe Living is the one that, if you've ever heard of mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a program developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn, and it's the one that a lot of hospitals support. Full Catastrophe Living is kind of the handbook for that 8-week course. So that's something to be aware of. I'm going to throw this in right here. There is MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, tends to be kind of a pricey thing. So if you tell your patrons, go check out MBSR, next thing you know, they've got like, I don't know, $300 or $500 course fee. There's a program, and now as I'm talking to you, I just realized I already added this later in my talk, but that's okay. I have the link later here, but there's a program called Palouse Mindfulness that is online, taught by a certified MBSR instructor, and it's completely free. And how I discovered it is they asked to use my TEDx talk in the first week of their coursework. So we'll get to that again, but just know that Jon Kabat-Zinn, mindfulness-based stress reduction, there's ways to do that without spending a fortune. There's ways to spend a fortune, but you don't have to. And that works for a lot of people as an entry point into mindfulness. 10% Happier I have to mention because I'm such a fan of Dan Harris. This is the first sign. I was listening to his book when I was running, and I kept stopping. I had to literally stop in my tracks because I've been waiting. I hoped I would be the one who would write this book, but I don't have the platform. He's a TV news anchor who had a panic attack on TV, who went into mindfulness skeptically and found it to be hugely impactful. And so he wrote this book, 10% Happier. This idea kind of conveyed what I'm saying when I'm saying to feel at home. I'm not trying to be happy all the time. A little happier would be nice, is kind of his point. And I kind of want to still be myself. So when I heard him, I had that shock of recognition in what he was conveying, my skepticism, my discoveries. He was conveying these things. And I could just see in my mind all these shelves and shelves of books in the bookstores and libraries that are all so heavily influenced with the religious cultural trappings. And here was somebody who was using kind of off-color language, really candid, and not at all that whiff of spirituality. So I'm thinking this is the beginning of expanding what I'm trying to expand in the world. And it's really been proven to be true. He's hugely popular. He's got a great following. He's got 2 books now. The second one is the Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. Highly recommend that for your collections because it's practical, unintimidating. He talks to police officers, people in the military, different people who are benefiting from mindfulness practice. He has a great podcast as well. Stop Missing Your Life is a newer book. This is one I recommend for your younger folks. It's perfect for like a college age, the upper end of your young adult readers. Really practical, grounded in science, really casual, humorous tone. So one to keep your eye on is this Corey Muscara guy. I'd keep an eye on him. In addition to the books, we've got the 10% Happier podcast, which is one of my favorites. I have a podcast called The Art of Attention. I'm sort of stuck. I'm not sure what to do right now with it, but what I've done is talk to people, not so much about meditation, but about ways they're paying attention in their lives instead of waiting for the world to change. So maybe you'll check that out. The Art of Noticing, I think it's Rob Walker. I feel like a kindred spirit in him. It's more emphasizing curiosity. I love that. I love the Hidden Brain podcast. And there's a couple, there's so many here, and I'll provide some links to a few more in my handout. Just know that, of course, there's tons of podcasts, and you can find one that resonates with you, and you can promote that kind of exploration with your patrons. So yeah, feel free to stop me at any point. I'm going to just barrel through, and so we can get to the part about applying this in the libraries. But my next wall is this idea of mindfulness being weird. So even if you put aside the fact that you don't have to be a Buddhist, it still has this, it smells like patchouli, right? And it doesn't have to. I think that we have to get away from what I love the hippies. I love I love what they recognized. I love what they were exploring. But it's time to upgrade that for our modern lives and to realize I don't think it's useful to go off into the woods or only explore mindfulness on a retreat or a setting that's designed to support it. I want to use it in my real world, in my life. I want to be able to bring it into the grocery store with my face mask, or I want to turn to it if I'm having trouble getting back to sleep in the middle of the night. So I'm a huge fan of not trying to conform to whatever you think mindfulness is, but once you get a sense that it's really just paying attention on purpose to sensory details, finding ways to sneak that into your routine in a clever way. I like to promote kind of a secret spy mission that to somebody else, you just look like a person walking your dog. They don't realize that you are practicing grounding your attention in sounds around you, the temperature that you feel of the air, what you see with your eyes, feeling your body moving. They don't know that you're exercising your attention even as you're walking the dog. I like to exercise my attention without drawing attention to myself. And this starts to set the stage for being able to have conversations with people about how people often realize in my classes that they're already doing something that could be considered mindful, and they could just tweak it a little to increase the challenge or the frequency of that, which that's my favorite in the world. Someone will, like I had a guy at a retirement center say, after a couple sessions, he said, so I went kayaking and I thought, could I do mindfulness here? And he said, does this count as mindfulness? I feel the kayak kind of shifting, and I could hear the birds singing, and a dragonfly flew by, and I noticed I was really relaxed. And I hope that you get a little hit of what I got out of that, which is like, oh my God, are you kidding? Not only is that mindfulness, that is so cool. And here's somebody who's in his like late 70s, early 80s, for the first time kind of playing with this idea. And these folks at this retirement center consistently blow me away. They consistently say, why didn't someone point me to this? I'm noticing so many more details. I'm getting such more richness out of ordinary things. Why didn't someone tell me about this sooner, right? We find ourselves like we are right now in the equivalent of a Zoom or video conferencing Teams meeting, right? There's no reason we can't sneak a bit of mindfulness into this world. We can do it in a regular meeting. Why can't we do it at this meeting? The idea of no one needs to know that as I'm listening to someone talk, I'm either listening to the sound of their voice, or maybe I'm noticing that my legs are kind of relaxed, or maybe I notice that my jaw is tensing up, and I can sort of see if I can soften my jaw a little. There's all kinds of ways we can shift our attention, even in the midst of ordinary life experiences. Okay, so the other wall is that mindfulness is difficult. And this is complicated because it's difficult if you don't know what to expect and if you don't know how to interpret your experience. This is what I spend a lot of time talking about, which is there's a difference between when we exercise our bodies, we know in order to develop, let's say, physical strength, there's going to be some discomfort involved in the exercise. If I lift weights, if I take the stairs, taking the stairs is going to be more uncomfortable than taking the elevator. If we expect to sit down and practice mindfulness and have the practice, the exercises feel like the results, we're in trouble. So in that way, what makes mindfulness difficult is expecting instant results. It would be like, I've decided to take the stairs and I just fly up 5 flights of stairs easily because I've chosen to work on my strength in my legs. It's not going to happen. The stairs are going to say, this is welcome to your current fitness level. And then you're going to say, I'm off here. I'll get off on the 2nd floor and take the elevator the rest of the way up. Mindfulness will say, welcome to your current ability to focus. And guess what? We all kind of suck at this. Our attention wanders constantly. If you expect it not to wander, you're in trouble. But if you start to realize this is a window of opportunity to say, oh, my attention wanders a lot. This is part of being a human. I wonder if I can start to gently steer it back to what I've decided to notice sometimes, right? Instead of treating that as a constant test, I can treat it as an opportunity to develop a capacity. And this is really interesting because there's really no place to sneak this in that won't be beneficial. Just pausing at any moment to notice, this is what it's like to sit and hear someone talk while I'm watching my laptop. Or this is what it's like to check my Facebook while I'm listening to someone talk on a video conference, whatever, right? Pausing to notice the sensory details, something I can see or hear or feel physically, or feel, is there some relaxation here? Is there some emotional response here? Pausing it all is beginning to practice mindfulness in a way that's going to start supporting your attentional fitness. One step up from pausing, the problem with pausing is we just forget to do it. We just don't remember. You can say, tomorrow I'm going to pause and notice, I'm going to notice some sensations randomly throughout the day. That might happen, but more likely you'll forget, which is fine. Part of this process is forgetting and then starting to remember. But it goes a little better if we decide, okay, wait, for the next week, whenever I brush my teeth, I'm going to practice just brushing my teeth and engaging my curiosity in the sensations that are there. When my day starts to flood, my list of things to do starts to flood in, I'm going to steer it back to, what does my toothpaste taste like? What does it sound like when I brush my teeth, right? So by associating it with a task, then we're starting to reduce the likelihood that we're going to forget to practice it all. If you focus on things that are relaxing, listening to music you like, or even while you're reading a book and you find yourself absorbed in the book, and notice how, what do I feel every once in a while? What does it feel like in my body to be really enjoying this reading? When we focus on relaxation, we get better at savoring relaxation, which means we get better at savoring pleasant moments. If we decide to work with triggers, how does it feel to be stuck in traffic? How does it feel to be at a red light? How does it feel to not be able to tell a Sunday from a Tuesday anymore? Like when we catch ourselves emotionally triggered, instead of rushing in to get rid of that emotional response, how do we take a data sample? What's it feel like to be triggered? I think this is missing from our discussion of being triggered. We can reduce triggers, but we can't eliminate them. How are we going to respond with more resilience to triggers? And that's going to be a self-paced thing, but it's an effort that practice rewards the capacity to respond to triggers. This is where we are never going to de-escalate ourselves or regulate ourselves if we're not willing to feel the emotion that is escalating. Good news is we can get better at it. We can get better at letting it build to a peak. We can get better at letting it, recognizing it's on board and starting to influence our thoughts and actions. So I highly recommend trigger practice. Timed practice is just the idea of what we think of as meditation, where you set a timer and you decide what sensation you're going to notice and what we're going to work with. So I like to expand this idea. It's not just sitting with your eyes closed. It's anytime you shift your attention on purpose. There's lots of apps out there that right now, I'm just going to, I wanted to highlight one that I haven't mentioned on my previous talks. Is there's these 3 apps developed by Judd Brewer when he was at Yale, and they're getting hugely significant results. Let's just take, for example, he's got this Craving to Quit, which is a smoking cessation app. He's got a mindful eating, and he's got one for working with anxiety. All of them involve a mindful approach to behavior change. Example I'll give is this Craving to Quit, which is instead of having people stop smoking cold turkey, it's inviting them to bring mindful curiosity to the craving itself, to the experience of smoking, and then to the effect of smoking. Are you getting the reward that you wanted to get out of this experience? And he's getting huge benefits. So I've got a list of those that I'll also share in the handout. Here's the Palouse mindfulness course I was mentioning earlier. I wanted to make sure that you guys knew. I love free things, and I'm sure you might too. The whole 8-week course as a free online self-guided thing. So in the library, something I'll share. So that I'm starting to think about, how do I bring this into the library? How do I introduce them to the library? What I tell people who come to me and say, I want my kids to be more mindful. How do I help support my kids being mindful? This is where I like to start. If you practice, promoting it's going to start to come naturally. It's like it's not a cognitive, it's not a conceptual understanding. When you practice, you're going to want to promote it. So it can be something as simple as utilizing a feature on your Fitbit for paying attention to your breath a couple times a day, or some of the other ways I've mentioned. And you can start to connect the dots for people, how you might encourage that in your patrons. When it comes to, let's say, setting up a group or a program about the idea of attentional fitness, and I welcome you to use any of my language and where, I don't have some copyright on attentional fitness. This is just something I'm trying to promote. But experiment with this idea of not telling people, hey, everybody, come learn to meditate, but hey, everybody, wouldn't it be interesting to get to develop your attention skills? And so part of what you can do is have this be really practical in asking people, when have you felt really focused or present? Or was there a time that you had a strong emotion, you were able to regulate it? Having people talk about these things. And when they talk about their experience, it starts to just be more universal, less weird, that we're all humans, we're all in this together. One time I was at a concert and I loved the music and I felt so absorbed, and I had my sense of time changed. And it just seemed like there was a timelessness about it. They're talking about the ability to be focused and to really not fight with what's happening. And then we can introduce the possibility of, what if we had habits that supported not waiting for a concert with your favorite band, but that you could start to set the stage for that to happen while you're making dinner or walking your dog or spending time with your kids. So that's my approach in general. And it always comes back to sensory. The way to practice is through sensory experience. This is trying to steer people away from this becoming a substitute for psychology or therapy. This is about capacity building through our senses. So when we emphasize sensory perceptions in the context of whatever programming, and this could be something with kids, getting them to point out different sensory details of some experience. And you don't have to call it mindfulness, but we can say that we can practice paying attention to our sensory experiences more to develop our attentional fitness. I think there's a huge opportunity to couch information literacy in this idea of, are there ways to respond better to news-related stress? Are there ways, sometimes I think in all fields we're guilty of using our own verbiage, but we can change the language a bit to invite this conversation about, when you read a provocative headline, where do you feel your emotion? What do you observe about yourself? I think there's a doorway here into teaching people about how to navigate conspiracy theories, getting some better understanding of cognitive biases, getting them to see how do you react when you're provoked. And instead of, I think we're stuck in this loop of those people need to change. And instead, there's an opportunity to say, I could be a better consumer of news and information. And I can start to recognize when I'm being informed versus when I'm being entertained or even manipulated. So I think there's a huge role attentional fitness can play in all of that. We can encourage people to, again, have attentional fitness fit their lives. You're already gardening. You could get double duty by noticing the relaxation you feel, or noticing what it's like to hear sounds around you while you're cooking dinner. I hope this is making sense of that. I'm just trying to normalize this as a very deeply human capacity we have. And then my final point, and I hope we have a little room for some chatting, is that I absolutely do not see this as a replacement for other supports like seeing your therapist or getting support you need from friends and reaching out and taking care of yourself in all the other ways I talked about with your well-being. But I do see in a similar way as what I mentioned earlier, there's this opportunity if I have greater ability to concentrate and I'm developing a palette for my ordinary sensory perceptions and noticing my emotions as they're happening, and I'm starting to regulate my emotions, I can guarantee you're going to get more out of the support you're getting from therapists and family members. You're going to start to notice ability to communicate your feelings better because you're feeling them and you're turning some attention to actually noticing them instead of just in a rush to get rid of them. The last thing about that, I do coaching for a employee assistance program, a big program in Ohio, and the kind of ideal in that world is if the person is assigned a therapist and me as a mindfulness coach, then we make sure that our approach is, I feel like sort of like a personal trainer or a physical therapist. They're doing the therapy issues, but I'm helping them work on capacities to get more out of those efforts. So it's pretty rewarding. Can I give you one example and then we'll open it up for questions. I have a nurse working in intensive care, and she just started there in January. And she was quickly burning out because of this increase in all the patients with COVID and all the people who there was, they reached the end of what they're able to provide as far as care, and people are dying. And she, talking to her, she was reporting how she trying not to feel what she feels. So we came up with a couple of exercises, one for her to do at the end of her shift and one to do during a situation where she was noticing an emotion. And it was giving her a way to be ready to feel an emotion on the inside, even an uncomfortable one, while holding it together on the outside, but not getting into the habit of suppressing that emotion on the inside. And then giving herself a few minutes after work before entering her evening to be able to kind of feel the residue of whatever emotions had built up during the day. And it's really satisfying how quickly she took to this. It's like being a physical therapist and your patient actually does the homework, does the exercises, and they have increased range of motion. So I felt really excited about this as an example of applying what I'm talking about really in the real world right now. So that's what I got, people. Any questions you have for me? Any observations, or is it helpful?
Cindy wrote a great comment in the chat a while back when we were talking about the Jon Kabat-Zinn book. We had a patron who used full catastrophe living when she was dying of cancer, and she raved about it. So great real life example there.
Yeah, that's a really great example. And that's really encouraging to hear too, because the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, if you hand that book to a patron or suggest that book to a patron, you're actually giving them the handbook for that course. And it's Jon Kabat-Zinn, that's the first person I read. I read Wherever You Go, There You Are. And it really does get you to shift your perspective, right? It's like, oh, wait, I don't have to convert to some belief system. I have to get curious about what it feels like to be alive while I'm living, right? And I think something like a terminal illness or grief can sometimes nudge us in those directions of turning towards what people have figured out. What I like to encourage is then, if it works for people in that kind of a scenario, maybe we treat it like a vaccine and we practice it before we need it when the doorway opens for that. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Anybody else have any examples of other titles or apps or podcasts in this area that you already are using or recommending?
And a reminder for the people who are on the phone, if you do *6, you can come through and we'll hear your voices.
And also, if the voice, I know we're recording and that can be intimidating sometimes, but if you wanted to enter a chat, like that first example. And if there's no question, that's fine too. I am curious to hear if people find it relevant, or am I building a strong case for something that you can see attentional fitness could be something that the world of librarianship could get behind as a tool to support things like information literacy? Does that resonate, or anybody have any thoughts on that?
I can go ahead. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I feel like this is an amazing tool, and I look forward to ordering these books so that I can put them into people's hands. But I definitely feel like in order to run any programming, I would need a lot more information or a really great guest speaker, such as yourself. Because otherwise I don't feel like I could do it justice. I think it's an amazing tool, especially just specific to like news related items. If you could like market it that way, because I think everyone feels that stress. And so it would be really useful. So thank you. This has been amazing.
Well, thanks. That's great feedback. And it also makes me think that there could be room for, I'm introducing something new here, really, right? People don't talk about this, and having a guest speaker come show how it's done, I also think would demystify it, because it's sort of like, I get it, and this is a work in progress, but I'm hoping to spark ideas that people say, I certainly can't teach someone how to meditate, or I'm not exactly sure of all the ins and outs of this, but I could invite people to be curious about what's it like to we could, in this specific context, what do you notice when you read a headline that is appealing to you, or a headline that's not appealing to you? How do you start to assess? This is one thing you could do. What you're already doing for thinking critically about information sources, and just sneaking a little bit in of how do you know when something sounds true? Like, how do you know when something sounds true versus being manipulated? It's a really interesting possibility to get better at conveying real-time emotional awareness as a tool for information literacy. My hunch is that this is all intellectual, but actually that the emotion is huge, which is why we're not really good at navigating the polarization, because we're responding to emotion with argument instead of validation of the emotional response. And we're inundated with manipulative content. So we're asking people to distinguish manipulation from facts, but they're being manipulated all day long, right? It's a huge library, right? It's a library challenge. I think it's a place for librarians where we could really have an impact, though, if we can figure out how to normalize it and kind of wrestle it out of the hands of something that seems religious.
Yeah, something that popped into my head is something that would be doable right off the bat. It's like programming that I'm already doing for children, because parents are around being it's virtual, and paying attention just to start it off with some sort of noticing activity. We've been doing little mask activities, like to try to read someone's emotion with a mask on, but to like bring that a step further to some mindfulness would get parents involved and normalize it a little bit.
Oh my gosh! So if me getting chills is an indication that is a great idea, I just got a cascade of chills, and you're reminding me I should include a couple. There's some books now that I feel like they're not weird and they're sensory, that I'll try to put on my list of resources too. And yeah, the cool thing about kids is you can just ask them, hey, how many sounds can you hear right now? If you get really quiet, who can hear more than 3 sounds? And you don't ever, for kids, I don't ever have to say to them, let's try to be mindful. You just say, can you hear that? What, can you hear that airplane? Can you hear the airplane flying overhead? If you ask someone to engage their senses, you're introducing attentional fitness in my book. So I would love to hear how some of that goes if you experiment. I would also love to hear any experimentation that goes well or poorly. I would love to hear about it, how I could be of support for that.
Darren, there's a request in the chat for the link to the MBSR online course. Are you able to pull that up fairly
Yep.
easily?
It
Put it,
is there. Palouse. Kind of a strange. I don't know if it's his last name. I don't know. Can you guys see it?
yes. Thank you.
Pretty cool, huh? Yeah. And look for week 1. Look for me in week 1, which is super cool. And this is inside secret. This is why I think part of why my numbers are so high, my TEDx numbers, without any kind of national promotion. I think he's the one. Somebody translated, put Spanish subtitles, and it might be this site. But so it's not just the TEDx site, it's also the Palouse site and other sites that are promoting my TEDx talk, which has me like at 500,000 without really any big push, which is super cool. 500,000 views. All right.
So I'm going to put the link to the evaluation in the chat here. It's very short, so if people could fill that out, it'd be really helpful, because this is grant funded, and that will help with our reporting and also just planning future CE programs, of course.
And I'm going to add some children-related authors and titles, and I'm going to spruce up my handout that I already have ready and kind of even curate a little more, and then I'll get that out to you soon, Joy. And I appreciate you helping distribute that, and then let me know what people, if they thought this was a useful, good use of their time. So.
And that will have the list of podcasts that you mentioned earlier. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll send that out to everybody.
All right.
Well, thank you very much once again, Darren. This has been a great series. We've learned so much, and I love the idea of bringing this into librarianship, and you certainly are a person that can be very helpful doing that. So hopefully it will spread. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.